Here at the North American International Auto Show in Detroit, there's some newfound optimism. That's the opinion of Breakingviews columnist Anthony Curry, who is with me in Detroit. Breakingviews goes on the road.
Yep, absolutely.
So we're in Motor City. What would you describe as the vibe of the show this year?
I think it feels pretty good, actually. Certainly if you're an American car maker, this year the auto show seems pretty good. From the moment they kicked it off with Ford launching its Fusion, it looks good, feels good, they've got some good reviews on it, and you can just feel how well they're feeling this will do for them. Whether it does or not is another matter, but they feel it's going well. Chrysler feels it's going well with this Dodge Dart they're launching. And General Motors as well, the Cadillac they've launched, a few others are coming up with. They all feel a lot more optimistic about where they're going.
What's interesting though is, in many ways, they were blessed last year from a business perspective in that they had less competition from the Japanese. Obviously there were some natural disasters, Japanese production grinds to a halt in some areas. All right, so what happens to the Japanese automakers this year? What sort of comeback do we see?
Well, I think it's going to depend on which one we're talking about. Let's take the two main ones we think about here in the US. Firstly, we've got Honda. Now, Honda suffered quite a lot last year, not just because of the floods in Thailand and because of the earthquake. They had some bad product launches. The Civic didn't go down too well. They're going to relaunch or retweak that. The Accord has been, the sales there have been dropping in the US for the last few years. But so actually has Toyota. You know, we've got here one of their favorite cars, obviously the Prius. But their Camry has been falling about the same rate as the Accord over the last 3 or 4 years, which shows that maybe the brand image isn't as good even before we got into what did Toyota have a year and a half, 2 years ago, had the recall issue over its brakes. So they've both been stumbling, but this year they've got over most of that. The production is back up after the earthquake and the floods, and they don't really quite have the wherewithal they used to start pushing out incentives. Now they've got a lot of cash, but they don't like where the yen is, and you know they really don't have a great deal of margin to play with at the moment. So maybe they won't push for too many incentives, which means for the first time in quite a long time, in certain segments of the market, we've got the Japanese and the Americans fighting on a pretty much level playing field.
Although South Korea's had a car of the year, right?
Yeah.
Hyundai came up with a car of the year, so I guess everyone's in the game.
Exactly, it's not just the Japanese versus the Americans anymore. You're right, Hyundai's got a good few cars out there, and yeah, they've done a really good job at marketing what they do. They've got some innovative financing techniques, and they've even at points, along with Kia last year, if you put the two together, they've got up to almost 10% of the market on various months last year, which is what Chrysler's got, and that's come from virtually nowhere. I mean, it's a pretty good showing. Then you've got the perennial mainstay of the auto industry, Volkswagen, which really wants to increase its share of the market across the board. And if they come into the US in a big way, which they plan to, then you know GM, Ford, and Chrysler have got two other really big competitors to play with, along with the Japanese.
Well, they probably should come into the US market, given what's going on in Europe, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Europe is a bit of a mess now. That most people are factoring in a sort of 3 or 4% decline. But if you look at the stocks on a certain basis, you could say the investors are factoring in a 10 to 15% decline, which really is that's just for this year. I mean, they haven't restructured anywhere near as much as the American market has, nor have sales fallen as much. So the worse the crisis gets in Europe, the worse it's probably going to hit the car makers.
And from an investor perspective, it's interesting, even though we are seeing a gain with Detroit's Big Three, look at GM stock, for instance.
Yeah, well, then again, all of them have gone down about a third over the last year. Ford, GM, Toyota, Honda, they've all been hit. They're all worried. You know, obviously these guys because of the earthquake, Ford and GM because of the knock-on effect, mainly I think of Europe and what it means for the US market, which no one really knows. And let's not forget, GM has a very big operation in Europe, as does Ford, but GM's is losing money, probably has too much share of the market to be able to make money in, and is hamstrung by a lot of union contracts in Germany, part of which they're beginning to get through, but it's a long struggle.
Are you enjoying Detroit, Anthony?
Oh, it's great. It's the weather's pretty good for Detroit in January, and yeah, it's a good feel to the place.
Anthony Curry, great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Breakingviews columnist. I'm Rhonda Schaffler. This is Reuters.